Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie Indecent Proposal, released on April 7, 1993, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. In the soft glow of a dimly lit casino, where the clinking of glasses and the hum of hushed conversations blend into a tapestry of temptation, two souls stand on the precipice of a life-changing decision. Their names are David and Diana Murphy, a young couple bound by love and dreams, yet teetering on the brink of financial despair. The man's crisp white shirt clings to his shoulders, the blue veins on his neck pulsing as he places bet after failed bet at the blackjack table. The woman, dressed in a flowing pastel gown that whispers of innocence and hope, watches him with reverent concern, her delicate fingers grazing his arm in a gesture of unwavering support. Though their stakes are stacked high, mortgage payments overdue, dreams of a home far from the pounding neon lights, they remain tethered to each other by a love that feels as expansive as the desert sky beyond the casino walls. But beneath their affectionate clasp lies a current of unease. In whispered moments, Diana worries that their love might not be enough to carry them through the dark tides of doubt. She dreams of a life where the clink of slot machines is replaced by the laughter of children shared under the dappled light of their own backyard. He dreams of her smile framed not by the harsh glare of overhead spotlights but by the soft glow of lampposts lining a quiet street. Together, they bide time until a single stroke of luck might rescue them from their mounting debts, even as each failed turn of the card threatens to drown them in despair. They leave the casino that night with empty pockets but full hearts. She gently places her hand on his cheek, brushing away the tension that has drawn lines on his forehead, and he reassures her that better days lie just beyond the horizon. Their carriage back to their modest apartment drifts past neon-lit avenues where the relentless pulse of chance hums like a siren's call, beckoning those who dare to dream of fortune. But for this couple, that dream is tainted by the knowledge that their bank account stands on the brink of collapse. They've wagered everything on a chance that might never come. Yet as they step into the warm familiarity of home, her home, which they've hoped to fill with their shared laughter, an unspoken promise flickers between them. Love will find a way, even when the world seems stacked against them. It is in this fragile moment, where hope and desperation intertwine, that the contours of their fate begin to shift. Across the flickering horizon, another figure watches from afar, one whose life is gilded in privilege, his power tempered only by curiosity. He is John Gage, a billionaire whose appetite for extravagance is matched by a restless yearning to feel alive. In his lush private suite, decorated in muted golds and mahogany, he peruses accounts of the latest philanthropy and global investments. The flicker of candlelight dances on his smooth features as he steps onto the balcony overlooking the glittering cityscape, the river of headlights below resembling a trail of shooting stars. To him, wealth is a game of infinity, an endless dance of numbers that holds no stake beyond fascination. But in the quiet of his opulent solitude, he wonders if even billions can grant the elusive spark that sets the soul ablaze. A chance encounter promises to upend everything. When he hears of a couple whose devotion seems unshakable despite their struggles, a story whispered among social circles and tabloids alike, he can't resist the tantalizing possibility of placing a wager on something infinitely more intoxicating than money: love. In his mind, this couple's story becomes a living experiment, a test of whether a towering sum can shift the balance of the human heart. He arranges a meeting at an exclusive resort, one perched on the edge of a sapphire-blue ocean that shimmers with untold promise. The couple arrives, greeted by the scent of salt air and the rustling of palm fronds, unawares of the proposition that is about to unravel their world. When they meet, time seems to fold, a collision of hearts that remains grounded in fragile reality. They stand before him in a room that overlooks the ocean's expanse, the horizon seemingly dissolving between sea and sky. She, with her eyes wide and shimmering with disbelief, reaches for his hand, feeling the electricity of tension that coils tightly between them. He, ever protective, positions himself slightly in front of her, as though shielding her from the maelstrom that threatens to invade their lives. The stranger sits across from them, his presence a paradox of ease and storm. He leans forward, dark eyes glinting in the warm glow of lamplight, and in hushed, measured words, extends his offer. Nothing short of $1 million in exchange for a night with Diana. For a heartbeat, the world tilts off its axis. The words hang suspended in the air, a hot ember that sears the fragile veneer of security these two have built. She gasps, her hand flying to her mouth, and he feels his breath catch, years of devotion and shared dreams converging in an instant of unbearable tension. The stranger's measured gaze seems to bore into them, as though daring them to accept or refuse. In that moment, love and fear swirl into an impossible mosaic. Can love survive when set against the weight of insurmountable temptation? Can fidelity remain steadfast when shackled to the promise of financial salvation? Their silence stretches, unbroken, as the ocean's rhythmic pulse echoes through the room. He considers the collapse of their dreams if he refuses. No mortgage, no children's laughter in a home they can't afford, no future. Yet he also faces the possible dissolution of the very bond that has sustained him through every trial, every debt, every whispered hope. They glance at each other, eyes wide with quiet anguish, hers shimmering with tears unspilled, his resolute chin trembling with the weight of a decision poised to fracture the fragile sanctuary of their love. The stranger's fortune waits, gleaming like a forbidden star, while the path of devotion stands shrouded in uncertainty, each step perilous. At last they speak. Their voices merge, one trembling with fear, the other brimming with anguish. She whispers that she would do anything to keep them together, to carve out a life where they can breathe without the crushing weight of debt. He, his jaw clenched, his vision blurred by unshed tears, declares that if money can save them from ruin, then let it be so. In that agonizing second, he lays their love at the feet of temptation, wielding devotion as both armor and dagger. The millionaire smiles, an inscrutable curve of satisfaction, and slides a briefcase across the table, its latch clicking shut like a portent of the irrevocable. They leave the meeting in a haze, the ocean's breeze whipping her hair like frantic whispers. The briefcase rests heavily in his hand, a tangible embodiment of their sacrifice. Their car glides along the coast road, palm trees flickering past like a strobe of memories, sunlit afternoons in that same resort, warm sand slipping between their toes, laughter echoing against the cerulean sea. Now, the memory of that laughter seems like a distant dream, drowned beneath the heavy hum of the car's engine and the pounding of their hearts. In their silence, each hears the other's breath catch, feels the tremor of fear that quivers through their being. They have sold a piece of their soul, trading overnight passion for the seed of their future. When dawn breaks, the finality of their decision settles like dew across the world. They are given a night of luxury, rooms bathed in moonlight, champagne chilled to trembling perfection, and sprawling expanses of white linen sheets that beckon with both promise and dread. He watches as she ascends a curving staircase draped in velvets and polished mahogany, her silhouette carved against a backdrop of crystal chandeliers. In that moment, he feels every heartbeat shatter into a million shards, each one etched with the memory of her laughter on sunlit beaches. The door closes behind her with a soft click, severing their contract for one endless night. Left alone in the suite's opulence, he slumps into an overstuffed chair, the briefcase resting on his lap like a dead star. The city lights twinkle below, as though mocking his heart's turmoil. He pours himself a drink, the amber liquid catching the lamplight in swirling patterns, and finds himself trembling under the weight of what he has unleashed. He whispers her name into the hush, a prayer that she remains faithful to the same devotion that once bound them. In the distance, the lighthouse's beam sweeps across the ocean, a solitary pulse that seems to echo his silent plea for mercy. Meanwhile, she stands alone behind the closed door of that luxury suite. Her reflection shimmers in the full-length mirror, a vision of beauty caught in a web of torment. The gowns laid out for her, silks of midnight blue and crimson, flutter like colored ghosts. She feels the briefcase's weight in her mind, not in her hands. She knows what awaits, the wary anticipation of a stranger's embrace, the hush of night punctuated by the cruel promise of betrayal. Yet she also recognizes that her choice was born of love, a desperate hunger to secure a future for them both. As the moonlight washes over her, she steels herself for what must unfold, though every fiber of her being rebels. The stranger finds her in the room, the door swinging open as though to welcome her surrender. His smile is warm, but his eyes glint with the rational calculus of a man accustomed to getting what he wants. He offers her a drink, and she accepts without looking at the glass, her gaze fixed on the horizon visible from the floor-to-ceiling windows. Behind her, the city pulses with life, unaware that within this room a love is being tested beyond measure. He steps closer, his suit crisp and commanding, and she turns, her eyes an ocean of sorrow and fierce resolve. The door clicks shut, and for a heartbeat, time stands still. She breathes in the perfumed air, laden with the promise of luxury and the sting of betrayal. Her heart clenches, but she reminds herself why she is here, to secure their future, to save the life that he has nearly extinguished through his risks at the blackjack table. What happens next is both tender and agonizing. In the hush of the room, they dance around each other, two souls inhabiting a space that thrums with expectation and dread. His touch is measured, respectful, yet he cannot hide the question burning in his mind. How can one share the body of his beloved with a stranger without fracturing the very essence of love? She, in turn, feels the caress of his fingertips and the tug of his breath, but her gaze drifts to the door, where her husband waits, faithful, trusting, and unknowing. The stranger's words are gentle, rehearsed to offer comfort without crossing boundaries. Her mind races, torn between the hush of her own heartbeat and the pounding of memory that floods her chest. In that tender collision, each breath she draws is a prayer, an invocation that he awaits her return, that love can endure this trial by fire. Outside, he paces in the suite's antechamber, staring at the briefcase as though it holds not just money, but the weight of their shared life. Every tick of the ornate clock on the mantelpiece echoes like a footstep toward oblivion. He wonders if she is remembering the feel of his hands, calloused from years of work, warm from midnight cuddles, or if she is simply feigning resolve for his sake. The hours stretch like molten glass, each moment a searing reminder of what he has sacrificed for love. He takes another drink, the alcohol burning a path down his throat, but it blurs nothing. Every corner of the room reminds him of her laughter, the curve of her smile, the way she once danced barefoot on their living-room floor. Now, she dances for another man, and he prays that she dances with her heart still tethered to his when dawn's first blush colors the sky. The dance concludes. The door opens, and she emerges, her face pale, her eyes heavy with unshed tears, but her posture unbroken. In that fragile moment, they see each other anew. One, a man who surrendered his heart to the greatest gamble of his life. The other, a woman who braved the abyss for love's promise. The briefcase remains between them, an altar upon which devotion and betrayal conspire. She steps forward, closing the space with a trembling hand that brushes his, and he feels a spark ignite, a fragile ember that whispers of survival. Yet as their gazes lock, they know that nothing will ever be the same. Their future, once a bright tapestry, now lies unraveling in the quiet of dawn. They leave the suite together, retracing their steps through the resort's opulent halls, past fountains that whisper sonatas of wealth, and under archways that glow with golden light. The air is thick with the scent of tropical blooms, but the fragrance sours on their tongues. In that walk, they share no words, only measured glances heavy with elliptical truths. Each step toward the parking lot echoes like a promise whispered through a veil of tears. They will try to rebuild, but the foundations of trust have been shaken. The generator of their love has sputtered, and now they must search for the spark that might rekindle it. Back at home, surrounded by the humble comforts they once cherished, they confront the reality of their choice. The briefcase sits unopened on their kitchen table, a monolith of both triumph and tragedy. He pours a glass of water for her, and she sips, her fingers tracing the rim of the glass as though mapping the edges of her own heartbreak. They speak finally, words laced with remorse, forgiveness, and the fierce ache of hope. She tells him that she would cross every inferno for him, that in that room she fought not for money but for the shard of love that binds them. He confesses that his heart almost shattered at the sight of her stepping from that door, that in that moment he tasted the bitter ash of loss. Together, they acknowledge that money can buy freedom from debt but cannot redeem the innocence that was lost. From that day forward, their love becomes an uncharted landscape, scarred by the trial they endured, yet also imbued with a deeper resilience. They pack away the briefcase, vows inscribed upon its cold metal locks, and return to the routines of life, the quiet mornings enveloped in the sun's gentle glow, the laughter over spilled coffee grounds, and the tender way their fingers entwine as they walk shoulder to shoulder. The wounds of that night remain, but they serve not as chains but as reminders of the price paid and the strength discovered. In each glance exchanged over kitchen counters, they share an unspoken vow that no sum, no trial, will ever eclipse the bond they forged in the crucible of temptation. And as years drift by, the memory of that fateful proposition becomes a touchstone, an echo of the night they danced with shadows and emerged clinging to each other. They raised children in that home they once thought they could never afford, filling it with laughter, tears, and the gentle cadence of everyday love. Each anniversary, they return to the edge of that glittering ocean, standing hand in hand on sand warmed by the sun's affectionate gaze. There, they watch the tides rise and fall, a reminder that life's rhythm endures beyond any gambit of fate. In the hush of twilight, the ocean stretching toward infinity, they whisper a final promise, that love has the power to transcend every temptation, to withstand every storm. And in that whispered vow, they discover a truth more precious than any fortune, a truth that shines brighter than any jackpot glimmering beneath the casino's unrelenting lights. Their story, carved by the ache of choice and the triumph of devotion, becomes a testament to the resilience of the human heart, a reminder that even at the brink of despair, love can forge a path toward redemption and hope. In the warm glow of a late afternoon sun, Diana and David walked hand in hand along a winding coastal road, their footsteps stirring up golden dust that shimmered like flecks of memory. She wore a simple white sundress that billowed around her knees, the hem brushing against the tips of drought-resistant grasses. He sported a well-worn denim jacket over a pale blue shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal calloused forearms, testaments to years spent laboring on construction sites and juggling part-time bookkeeping to keep their dreams afloat. Their car, an aging Honda with rust creeping along its wheel wells, idled at the side of the road. In the distance, the ocean met the sky in muted cerulean hues, as though nature itself hesitated before allowing heaven to kiss the earth. They had arrived in California only months ago, fueled by hope and afraid but unbreakable promise. Marry in a small ceremony by the water and build a home where laughter would echo through sunlit rooms. Their plans had seemed simple, almost naive. He would earn money repairing homes, and she would write poetry, her verses whispered into notebooks at dawn. But reality, like a relentless tide, eroded the shoreline of their optimism. At the realization of every dusk, when bills arrived stamped in urgent red ink, their shoulders drooped with the weight of unmet expectations. Yet, even amid mounting debt, they clung to each other, believing their love could outlast any storm. When they reached the edge of the cliffside road, David paused to admire the view. The wind whipped through his hair, carrying the briny scent of salt and possibility. He pulled out a faded photograph from his jacket pocket, a snapshot of the two of them standing before a tiny A-frame cottage, its windows lit by golden lamplight. At that moment, his memory flickered back to the day they discovered this place online. Pages of a listing boasting affordability and charm, tucked away in a coastal town where houses seldom stayed on the market for long. The thought of owning a home had filled their hearts with a buoyant joy, only to be met with the cold reality of closing costs, home inspections, and skyrocketing interest rates. The little house remained out of reach, its lights glowing only in his dreams. Diana approached him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "This view," she whispered, her breath catching like a secret. He looked at her, the ocean's reflection dancing in her hazel eyes, and felt a familiar swell of gratitude, grateful that she, despite her own dreams deferred, stood steadfast by his side. They embraced, and for a few fleeting seconds the world narrowed to the press of her cheek against his chest and the murmur of waves below. That evening they returned to their modest apartment, a converted garage perched above an aging motel. Inside, the space felt stifling. Peeling wallpaper curled at the edges, and a single overhead bulb cast harsh shadows that seemed to accentuate every crack in the plaster. The narrow kitchen held a battered table covered in overdue bills and grocery receipts, each one a small reminder of dreams they had yet to realize. Diana perched on a dented stool, her hands splayed on the counter as David slipped off his shoes and sank onto the sagging couch. He ran his fingers through his hair, exhaling a long, weary sigh. "I've tried everything, Dee," he confessed, his voice low, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile peace they clung to. "I picked up extra shifts, I asked for raises. Nothing's enough." He gestured at the mess of statements and notices scattered across the table. "I'm terrified we're sliding backward, not forward." She rose and placed a hand on his cheek, fingers trembling with empathy. "We'll figure this out," she murmured, though she knew the words felt hollow beneath the weight of their reality. She had submitted short stories to magazines that never responded. She had taken a part-time job waiting tables at a cafe where customers sometimes left no tip. Still, each night she sat at their cracked windowsill and wrote verses in a cramped notebook, hoping that someday her words might become something more than ink on paper. Their salvation arrived in the form of an unexpected phone call. David found himself at the numbered buttons of his phone, staring at the caller ID that spelled out "Lottery Commission." Surprised, he answered with a shaky "hello," half expecting someone to hang up or deliver bad news. But the woman on the other end spoke in crisp, official tones, informing him that a ticket he had purchased months earlier, on a whim at a convenience store, had been selected as a minor winner. Not enough to pay the mortgage on even a modest home, but enough for a taste of freedom. $15,000, to be precise. He staggered back, the phone slipping from his hand as he blinked away the disbelief and somehow managed to say, We won." When he hung up, he turned to Diana, who watched him with wide eyes. He pulled her into a lopsided embrace, whispering, "We won $15,000. She kissed him fiercely, and laughter rose between them, exhilarated, desperate laughter that slipped past tears. In those moments, relief washed over them like a cleansing tide. Dreams of that A-frame cottage flared once more, and for a brief time they believed they could finally step onto stable ground. They celebrated that night with store-bought champagne and a rather stale loaf of bread. In the dim light of their apartment, they raised their glasses to new beginnings. They made tentative plans: pay off the car loan so that every penny David earned could be saved for a down payment. They would scan listings, track interest rates, and attend open houses on weekends. In bed that night, they drifted into a contented sleep, wrapped in the soft blanket of hope. But hope can be fragile as spun glass. Within weeks, unanticipated repairs threatened to swallow their $15,000 before they could even reach the market. A crack appeared in their apartment's foundation after an unusually heavy storm. The landlord, pigeonholed by regulations, demanded that they cover the repair costs or face eviction. That fiasco cost them nearly half of their windfall. The rest was spent trying to smooth over late utility bills and a surprise medical expense when David twisted his ankle on a construction site. Their oasis of hope drained faster than sand through fingertips, leaving them with barely enough to keep the lights on and the fridge humming. One evening, defeated and weary, they found themselves standing before a large, neon-lit casino on the outskirts of the city. The sign proclaimed, "Fortune awaits," its roar of artificial lights drowning out the night sky. The place exuded a heady mix of desperation and possibility. Suits tapping on slot machines, laughter from high-stakes poker tables, and the constant murmur of dreams in motion. They paused outside, uncertain, each sensing the slippery allure of chance. She glanced up at the neon glow and whispered, "Just one chance, David." He nodded, though his heart trembled at the thought of risking what little they had left. Inside, they approached a blackjack table, where a seashell broadcast of whiskey and smoke clung to the air. David sat at a dim corner seat, while she watched from a respectful distance. He took a breath and placed a small stack of chips on the felt. His first hand lost, The second hand lost. On the third hand, his heart thudded as if echoing the casino's fluorescent heartbeat. He doubled down and prayed. The cards fell. 17 against the dealer's 18. Again. Defeat. Each loss tightened the invisible leash of desperation around his chest. Finally, as if spinning the wheel of fate itself, he hit a hot streak. Blackjack, another blackjack, and a third straight win that sent chips clattering like rain. He left the table with $1,000 in reserves, the briefcase of hope feeling heavier and more tantalizing than ever. They decided to celebrate. Just a modest dinner at a nearby diner where the waitress greeted them with warm familiarity and a knowing smile. There, amid the hum of open grills and the scent of sizzling bacon, they spoke of possibilities. A down payment that could be made viable in an up-and-coming neighborhood, a lease on a small cottage by the bay, a fresh canvas for their dreams. Their laughter wove through the clatter of dishes, and for a precious few hours, the world felt kind. They returned to the apartment, chestnuts of desperation smoldering beneath their ribs, but for a moment buried beneath the embers of joy. Their good fortune, however, took a dark turn when she received an unexpected invitation to an exclusive party held by a glamorous socialite at a lavish estate overlooking the ocean. David, exhausted from his double shifts and scratching together roofing estimates, urged her to decline. But she felt compelled. This could be an opportunity to network and maybe sell some of her poetry, she reasoned. He kissed her forehead and said, "Be safe, my love," though his eyes shone with apprehension. Later that night, she slipped into a sleek black cocktail dress that gleamed like starlight, stepping into an elegant car that whisked her away toward a sprawling mansion where crystal chandeliers danced with candlelight. The party was a swirl of champagne flutes, delicate hors d'oeuvres, and the soft strains of a jazz quartet playing in a marbled courtyard. She drifted among the crowd of finely dressed guests, art collectors, business magnates, and a handful of renowned writers. She felt both exhilarated and uneasy. Her heart fluttered at the possibility of finding someone who might publish her work. She held her poet's chapbook close, its pages dog-eared from countless readings, and floated through rooms filled with opulent upholstery and antique paintings that whispered of heritage and wealth. Then, in a hushed alcove lit by moonlight filtering through a wrought iron lattice, she encountered John Gage, the billionaire whose reputation preceded him. Tall, with salt and pepper hair and an Armani suit tailored to perfection, he possessed an air of casual command that made threads of conversation falter in his presence. His eyes held a glint of curiosity, as though he sensed unspoken possibilities in every soul he encountered. He introduced himself with a warm but measured smile, and she felt a frisson of both excitement and trepidation in his gaze. He complimented her dress, and she stammered a fragile thank you, gripping her chapbook as though it were a lifeline. They spoke of art and literature, and she shared a brief snippet of her latest poem. Its words rose soft and earnest in the hush, as though she had woven them from moonbeams and longing. He listened intently, his expression inscrutable, and congratulated her on her talent, offering to show her around the estate's private library. In that library, a sanctuary of leather-bound volumes and oak shelves rising toward a painted ceiling, he inquired about her life and dreams, his interest genuine yet tinged with that inscrutable aura of power. She spoke of David, of their struggles and the house they'd hoped to buy. When she admitted to him, with a tremor in her voice, that they were still living paycheck to paycheck, his eyes flickered with a strange intensity, as though he weighed her words on a scale no one else could see. He asked her to recount their story in further detail, leaning closer, as though the space between them held the key to some grander puzzle. She laid bare their hopes and fears, the bitter taste of debt, and the relentless hum of anxiety that shadowed their days. He nodded thoughtfully, tracing the spine of a first-edition novel as if that singular gesture could reveal secrets about love, poverty, and ambition. Then, with the lightness of a man offering a gift, he spoke, "I find your devotion to someone so earnest and so vulnerable quite compelling. I'd like to know if love can indeed conquer all. Would you be willing to demonstrate its strength?" She swallowed, heart-pounding, and shook her head, uncertain what he meant. He smiled, leaning back, and laid out the terms with crystalline clarity. one night with her, in exchange for a sum of $1 million. Her blood ran cold, her mind snapped to David's battered jacket, the mounting bills, and the advantage $1 million might offer them. Yet the notion felt like a vortex, spinning her reality into unreality. "You want me to spend a night with you," she began, her voice trembling as though broken glass had caught in her throat. He nodded, his tone gentle but unyielding, and placed a thin envelope on the desk. "Consider it an experiment," he said, eyes reflecting a mixture of curiosity and commerce. "If you love him as fiercely as you say, this test will only reinforce that bond. If not, perhaps you'll discover something new about yourself." Her mind reeled. Familiar tears burned behind her eyelids as she pictured David waiting for her in their apartment, trusting, untainted by this proposition. She clenched her fists, voice wavering like a fraying rope. I'd have to speak to my husband." He offered her a kind nod, understanding, though she saw the flicker of empathy in his eyes. "Of course. You will have one night to decide." She left the library shaking, breath ragged with the enormity of this proposition. Down the marble steps and through the rose gardens, she made her way back to the courtyard where a black limousine awaited, its polished surface reflecting the flicker of torches. The driver escorted her inside, and she sank into the plush seats as tears slid down her cheeks, her makeup blurring into lines of sorrow. When she reached her apartment that night, David waited as if she'd never left, his face alight with relief and longing. He kissed her, asking about the party, and she forced a wan smile, brushing off his questions. The envelope remained hidden in her purse, its edges soft beneath her fingertips as she tried to steady her racing heart. That night they lay awake, the moon drifting in through cracked blinds, and he dozed peacefully in her arms, trusting, while her mind spiraled through every variation of her darkest fear. She pictured herself in that library, imagining the hush of the air as he closed the door behind her. She closed her eyes, willing sleep to claim her, but unease haunted her dreams, weaving through each breath she drew. By early dawn, she slipped from his embrace, pressing her cheek to his steady heartbeat one last time before rising to face the unthinkable. In the soft glow of morning, she spoke to David, voice quavering but resolute, sharing the offer with a gravity that seemed to fill the room. He stared at her, disbelief and anguish warring in his eyes, as though unable to reconcile the love he held in his heart with the magnitude of the proposition he had just heard. When he finally spoke, his words trembled. $1 million for one night," she nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks, and he sank to the floor, hands braced against the worn carpet, heart pounding like a wounded animal. They clung to each other then, two souls tethered by love and despair, clinging to hope like a lifeline. With trembling hands, he gathered their meager savings and folded them neatly into a frayed envelope. She held her chapbook close as proof of her identity, her dreams, her art, offering herself as the currency he demanded. The weight of betrayal pressed upon them both, though his voice remained steady as he recited words that would bind them to fate. "We accept." And so, with that utterance, their lives split along new fault lines, love and money colliding in a single breath, promising salvation and begging ruin. She gathered her courage like a cloak, eyes full of tearful resolve, and he placed the envelope in her trembling hands. "One night," he whispered, "one night for our future." She nodded, heart heavy with the knowledge that some sacrifices burn brighter and deeper than any flame. She entered the waiting limousine, and the doors closed behind her with a soft sigh. He watched her go until the car's taillights vanished into the morning haze. In that moment, time fractured, her world moving forward toward a destiny she could scarcely fathom, and his world caught in a still point, heart suspended in the hinge of love and loss. The roar of the engine carried her away, leaving him alone in the hollow hush of an apartment that suddenly felt vast and empty, its walls echoing the promise of a life forever altered by a single fateful choice. She stepped into the sprawling suite as though walking through a veil of apprehension. The door closed behind her with a soft click that echoed like a gavel, sealing her fate for a single indelible night. The stranger stood by a grand piano, fingers brushing the ivory keys as though playing a prelude to the impossible bargain they had struck. She felt the carpet's plush embrace beneath her feet, shy of each step as though fearful of disturbing the hush that clung to gilded walls. The room glowed with lamplight, bronze sconces casting flickers across oriental rugs, crystal decanters shimmering atop marble tables, and a grand bed draped in silken sheets that promised both indulgence and betrayal. Her breath trembled, chest tightening with the weight of every unspoken vow she had just spoken to her husband. She drew in the air, wishing that love's memory might shield her from what was to come. He ushered her forward with a gentle nod, understanding that tonight was less about passion and more about a demonstration of pure sacrifice. "Whatever you feel," he said quietly, "is valid. No judgment." His words brushed her like a whisper through wheat fields, soft but capable of uprooting everything beneath her feet. She nodded, offering a fragile smile, though her heart pounded like a hummingbird's wings. He poured 2 glasses of champagne, the bubbles rising like crystalline prayer beads. They stood at a window overlooking the moonlit ocean, each sip a chilly burn down her throat. He asked about David, how her husband was, what they planned, how they clung to hope. She spoke haltingly, voice trembling as she recounted their struggles, mounting bills, dwindling savings, dreams deferred. He listened, gaze gentle, acknowledging her pain with an empathy so precise it stung her heart. When he placed his hand over hers, for a moment she felt torn between 2 worlds. The life she shared with David, built on tenderness and grit, and this new realm of impossible wealth that whispered promises of freedom. Their hands remained entwined longer than a polite greeting should allow, and she felt a flicker of warmth blossoming between them, as though human touch could transcend the gulf between sacrifice and compassion. He led her to the grand piano and offered to play a melody he had composed, notes that slid through the air like silken ribbons, drawing out her fear and wrapping it in something achingly beautiful. She closed her eyes, hearing the music swell in waves, catch in harmonies that felt like torn secrets. No judgment. His words brushed her like a whisper through wheat fields, soft but capable of uprooting everything beneath her feet. She nodded, offering a fragile smile, though her heart pounded like a hummingbird's wings. He poured 2 glasses of champagne, the bubbles rising like crystalline prayer beads. They stood at a window overlooking the moonlit ocean, each sip a chilly burn down her throat. He asked about David, how her husband was, what they planned, how they clung to hope. She spoke haltingly, voice trembling as she recounted their struggles, mounting bills, dwindling savings, dreams deferred. He listened, gaze gentle, acknowledging her pain with an empathy so precise it stung her heart. When he placed his hand over hers, for a moment she felt torn between 2 worlds. The life she shared with David, built on tenderness and grit, and this new realm of impossible wealth that whispered promises of freedom. Their hands remained entwined longer than a polite greeting should allow, and she felt a flicker of warmth blossoming between them, as though human touch could transcend the gulf between sacrifice and compassion. He led her to the grand piano and offered to play a melody he had composed, notes that slid through the air like silken ribbons, drawing out her fear and wrapping it in something achingly beautiful. She closed her eyes, hearing the music swell in waves, catch in harmonies that felt like torn secrets. And when the final chord resolved into silence, she opened her eyes to find him gazing at her with an intensity that blurred lines of propriety. In that charged hush, words felt futile. She inclined her head, willing herself to step forward into the unknown. He guided her toward the elaborate bed, one corner draped in velvet that glowed like embers in the lamplight. She felt as though she approached a sacrificial altar, each footfall trembling under the weight of her vow. He lifted her hand to his lips, not with desire, but with reverence. She closed her eyes, imagining David's face, his gentle eyes reflecting unwavering trust. And in that moment she felt the sharp sting of shame. But she inhaled courage like a prayer and nodded, as though summoning 1,000 ancestors to bolster her resolve. The sheets felt cool as porcelain as she slid beneath them. He turned away, as though granting her a sliver of dignity in an act meant to preserve their bond. She lay still, breath shallow, while he disrobed with quiet respect and slipped beside her in silence. The room held its breath as two souls drifted together, one offering comfort, the other brimming with gratitude born of penance. Sleep came as a tenuous truce, a thin veil that separated her from the gravity of what had transpired. She dreamt of David's laughter echoing across a sunlit patio, children's voices swirling in the air like bright confetti, and walls painted in hues of hope. But dawn's first light crept through the curtains, igniting the truth she had tried to bury. She woke to find him seated beside her, watching her with solemn kindness. He offered coffee in porcelain cups, the steam rising like a ghostly promise. She cradled the cup, warmth seeping into her palms, and felt tears gather at the edges of her vision. He spoke kindly, whispering that she need not apologize, that her courage had touched him deeply. He pressed a final envelope into her hand, a gesture meant not as a gift but as a testament to their unspoken understanding. She looked at him, gratitude and sorrow intermingling, knowing that tonight's debt had been repaid in full. When she stepped out of that suite, enveloped in the hush of an early morning breeze, she carried more than the weight of a single moment. She carried a fragment of her own dignity, fragile as glass, and a fistful of memories that could never be erased. The limousine's door closed behind her, and the driver watched her pass with a respectful distance. She sank into the back seat, fingers brushing the crisp envelope in her purse, its contents a final gesture of respect, meant not for redemption, but as a relic of a sacrifice made in love. Her eyes drifted to the ocean's horizon, where the water rippled beneath the pink blush of dawn, untainted by the night's sorrow. When she arrived home, she expected him to stand at the door, eyes lit with relief, arms open with unwavering love. But David did not rise to greet her. Instead, he lingered in the corridor, face a mask of raw emotion, eyes glimmering with a storm of unanswered questions. She stepped inside, shoulders rigid as stone, and dared to look at him. He held the envelope she had left behind, a pale document that shimmered with the power to both save and shatter. Tears blurred her vision as she realized how irrevocably his world had shifted in her absence. He glanced at her, and she saw his heart tremble like a candle in the wind. His voice, when it came, was a brittle whisper, "What did you do?" And in the space between them, she felt the earth crack open. Every breath she had taken that night suddenly felt trespassers against his trust. She shook her head, motioning for him to look away from the unopened envelope. "David, please," she pleaded, voice cracking like ice. "Let me explain." But he flinched at her words, as though they carried the sting of betrayal. He turned away, pacing the narrow confines of their living room, watching as the degree of her sacrifice unfolded in his mind like a specter for days afterward. They lived under the same roof but existing in separate universes. He moved through their apartment like a ghost, glancing at the briefcase they had stored away, fingers itching to tear open its locks. She tried to speak of her purpose, how she had done it out of love, how she had shouldered the burden alone to keep their dreams alive, but he rebuffed her words as though they were poison. She watched him at night, his silhouette hunched in the glow of a single lamp, brow furrowed in silent struggle. She worried she had traded their future for an illusion, uncertain if love could indeed conquer all. Eventually, he could bear no more. In the twilight hush of a rainy afternoon, he confronted her in their cramped kitchen. Rain traced rivulets down the window-pane like tears of the sky. He thrust the envelope before her, lips trembling with fury she had never known. "What was I supposed to do when I saw this?" he demanded, voice raw with anguish. "Was I supposed to be grateful or angry? How am I supposed to believe we have a future when you gave yourself away for money?" His question torpedoed their fragile peace, shattering it on the rocks of doubt. She stood before him, tears pooling in her eyes. "I did it for us," she whispered, voice trembling beneath its weight. "I believed that if we could break free of debt, we could rebuild our dreams stronger than before. I would never have done it if I didn't think our love could endure. I thought it would bring us closer." But he flinched at her words as though they wound a dagger in his heart. He turned away, though his shoulders shook with unspoken grief. They tried counseling, bought coffee at a cafe where she once waited tables, hoping the aroma of fresh roasted beans might thaw the ice that had formed between them. They shared forced smiles over lattes, rehashed memories of easier times, but each attempt felt like rehearsed lines in a play neither wanted to perform. He returned to roofing estimates, headphone cords looping around his neck, eyes distant as he stared at the spreadsheets on his laptop. She retreated into her poems, ink bleeding onto pages as she tried to capture the ache of their rupture. But each word felt inadequate to bridge the chasm. Their apartment, once alive with laughter and the promise of tomorrow, now echoed with hollow silences. One evening, he returned from a late shift, his face streaked with rain and regret. He found her sitting at the edge of their bed, knees drawn to her chest, blinking back tears. In her lap lay her chapbook, open to a page stained with smudged ink. He knelt before her, voice soft enough to waken sorrow. "I've been an idiot," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. She looked at him, eyes wide with hope and the fear that this might be another dream she dared not hold. He reached for her hands, fingers trembling against her palms. "I forgot why I loved you. I forgot the women behind those poems, that laughter, those hopes." He closed his eyes, and she felt his tears sear her skin like embers. "I'm sorry for everything I said, every doubt I let creep in. I'm sorry for not seeing how much you sacrificed." She opened her lips to speak, but he pressed a finger to her mouth, silencing her gently. "Let me show you," he whispered. They left that apartment behind, driving back to the seaside where they once dreamt of a home. The crash of waves and the scent of salt wrapped around them like a benediction. The sky hung heavy with clouds, as though recalling the storm that had raged inside their hearts. They walked in silence over windswept sand, shoulders brushing in a tentative dance of reconciliation. He held her hand, and she felt the tremor of his remorse. As they reached the edge of the shoreline, he knelt on one knee, turning toward her with a sparkle in his eye that felt like dawn breaking through gloom. "I can't promise to fix everything overnight," he said, voice hushed by the wind. "But I promise to try every day for the rest of our lives. Will you keep fighting with me?" Her breath caught in her throat. She saw the reflection of her own hope mirrored in his gaze. She nodded, tears shimmering like morning dew. "Yes," she whispered, and they sealed their promise with a kiss that tasted of forgiveness and new beginnings. In the days that followed, they returned to the city with a renewed sense of unity. He handed her the unopened envelope, the final payment for a night that had almost cost them everything. Together, they stood in their cramped kitchen, the envelope trembling between their fingers like a wounded bird. He opened it, money still pristine, untouched, and set it on the counter. Their eyes met, and in that meeting they both saw the truth. Money was indifferent, a mere tool. Their love, though battered, was a treasure beyond measure. She reached for his hand and said, "We don't need this any more." He nodded, and they placed the envelope in a drawer, a silent monument to their trial and the testament of their resilience. They began anew, living month to month but finding joy in each sunrise. She submitted her poems to a small literary journal and received a publication notice, a modest victory, but one that felt monumental in their renewed world. He secured a steady contract job with a construction firm, offering steady income and a chance to save again. Each day, they met across the kitchen table, sharing coffee and hushed gratitude. They revisited the coastal road on weekends, driving their Honda toward the horizon, tracing the path where they once dreamed of a cottage now destined to be their home. They walked barefoot on the beach, sand slipping between their toes like grains of hope, and laughed at memories of the casino's neon glow. Their footsteps wandered over sandcastles of past mistakes, firmly grounded in the promise of tomorrow. When they finally found a modest home, a small bungalow with peeling paint and a yard filled with uncut grass, their hearts soared. They painted the walls each morning, coaxing sunshine into every corner. She hung her poems on the refrigerator, magnets holding them like flags of victory. He built a small fence along the yard, his hammer tapping each nail with purpose. They planted a garden, seeds scattered in rows like prayers for the future. Each evening, they shared dinner in a kitchen that felt vast and warm, even with its scuffed linoleum floors. They spoke of children, of laughter echoing through rooms illuminated by setting sun. Their love, once tested by an irreversible bargain, now thrived on simple truths: honesty, forgiveness, and the quiet embrace of a partner who had chosen to stay. Years later, they hosted a small gathering of close friends in that same bungalow. Fairy lights twinkled overhead, wine glasses clinked, and mellow laughter filled the air. Their children, two bright-eyed siblings, ran barefoot through the yard, chasing fireflies as dusk settled into night. Diana watched her husband from the porch, the orange glow of lanterns painting his cherubic face, and felt her heart swell with gratitude. He caught her gaze, raised his glass in a silent toast, and she lifted hers in return. In that wordless exchange, they honored the journey that had nearly broken them but ultimately forged their bond in iron and fire. As their friends drifted home beneath star-studded skies, they lingered under a canopy of jasmine-scented air. He wrapped his arms around her waist, and they watched the children tumble into bed upstairs, exhausted yet fulfilled. The envelope, faded from years of neglect, lay forgotten in a drawer, its secret a distant echo. They leaned into each other, and she felt the gentle rise and fall of his breath, steady as the tides. He pressed a kiss to her temple, and she closed her eyes, savoring the promise of tomorrow. In the hush of that moonlit night, their love stood as a testament that even when wealth demands the highest price, love, when rooted in forgiveness and sacrifice, can endure beyond every bargain and bloom in endless grace. She stands at the edge of a window, the morning light spilling through gauzy curtains and catching the curve of her cheekbone in a soft glow. Diana wears a simple silk robe that falls open at her collar, but there is nothing simple about the tension etched between her brows. In her knuckles, the ribbon of a wedding gift slips through calloused fingers, threads worn thin by years of hope held on a fraying tether. She moves slowly, as though each step must be negotiated with care, a delicate balance between yearning and fear. Unlike a woman content to drift through life on the currents of chance, she is a dreamer with golden threads woven into her heart, threads that snap when the weight of her husband's mounting debts presses too close. In her eyes, there is a flicker of something fierce, an ember of conviction that life's storms can be weathered if love remains her lodestar. David emerges from the bedroom, the morning light tracing the arc of his shoulders beneath a crisp white shirt. His jaw is set with a gentle firmness, as though each syllable he speaks passes through a sieve of responsibility before it touches the world. On his face rests a calm that belies the anxiety coursing through his veins, a silent current pulling him toward decisions that might forever alter the course of their lives. He moves with quiet precision, slipping the wedding band from its box, adjusting the clasp of his worn leather watch, gestures that speak of a man accustomed to the hard work of provision, of evenings spent poring over bills under the low glow of a desk lamp. In his eyes resides a tender longing, a desire to see Diana smile beneath sunlit skies, to witness their shared dreams take root and grow. Yet the years have left marks on him. In the crease between his eyebrows, in the faint lines around his mouth, lie the echoes of every late-night argument when hope frayed thin, the sharp tang of fear pressing against the walls of his heart. He is neither hero nor saint, but a man striving to forge a future from the scraps of possibility. Even now, he treads lightly around Diana's sorrow, attempting to shoulder burdens he can scarcely lift. When he approaches her by that window, he places a gentle hand on her elbow, an anchor tethering her to the present, reminding her that she is not alone in this tempest. Across the city, where penthouse windows catch the glittering pulse of neon, John Gage exists in a realm of effortless privilege. He moves through rooms bathed in crystal light, one hand already brushing over the sleek lines of a sculpture he might purchase without reflection. The world bows to him, flirts with him, and he views it as a game to be mastered, a tapestry of choices whose only true currency is power. Yet beneath his tailored suits and aquiline profile, there lurks a man haunted by a yawning void, a hunger for something real, something that money cannot buy. He has staked his billions on gallant endeavors, philanthropy, indulgence, extraordinary gambles. Yet each act rings hollow when measured against his own elusive longing. In boardrooms, he speaks of ambition and innovation with a voice like polished marble, yet the moment he tucks a pen behind his ear or walks alone through a gallery of modern art, guilt creeps upon him like a phantom. He wonders if his wealth has become a gilded cage, his options too broad, his purpose too thin. When he learns of Diana and David, two souls bound by love yet teetering on the brink of despair, he is drawn to their story as though it were a bonfire in the darkness, a chance to test whether devotion can indeed defy the gravitational pull of desperation. In his heart, he craves an experiment in humanity, one that might yield a truth beyond the sterile arithmetic of bank statements. Diana's colleagues at the cafe often describe her as radiant even in toil, a face that seems sculpted by moonlight, a voice that lilts like a lullaby when she reads her poems aloud to a handful of patrons on slow afternoons. It is her gift with words that first caught David's attention, a phrase coaxed from his lips in a moment when he had lost faith. She had waited tables that day in a tattered apron, swept silverware and braced hot coffee cups, yet each movement held grace. When she recited a verse fragment she had penned in the margins of a tattered notebook, quoting "the sun's gentle hand on wounded souls," David felt his own heart uncoil, touched by the promise that language could mend what money could not. In a world that measured worth in cold figures, she offered warmth, an ability to glimpse the world as a tapestry of connections. Yet even her words, as golden as they seemed, could not shield her from the harsh truth that love alone would pay neither the mortgage nor the medical bills stacking like grim totems on their kitchen table. David's hours are consumed by numbers, by ledger lines that stitch income to expense, by the relentless tick of clocks that count down to inevitable deadlines. Every morning he dons the hardness of responsibility like armor, even as his heart quietly rebels at the thought of another night spent scraping wages to keep the darkness at bay. Friends marvel at his resilience, how he greets each setback with a steady nod, how he offers a wry smile to his worried wife, even as they cannot fathom the quiet toll of watching his life's love suffer beside him, eyes full of unasked questions. His soul hums with a muted refrain. Are we enough for each other? Can love endure the weight of this world's relentless needs? When he learns of Diana's meeting with John Gage, he experiences the world tipping on its axis. He returns home from a day of labor, muscles aching like old scars, only to find her at the threshold, face flushed with something akin to shame. In her eyes, he sees both fear and conviction, a tremor that reminds him of every sacrifice she has ever made for their shared dreams. In that pregnant moment, he rests the envelope stained with hope on the kitchen table and tries to read the storm gathering in her gaze. He knows that in her presence lies an unspoken question. How far will love carry us when the world demands its pound of flesh? Over the course of their marriage, Diana has softened him, bound him to laughter and warmth, to poetry that trickles from her lips like a fountain of hope. He had once believed his role was that of protector, but he discovers that strength is not a bulwark against despair, but a willingness to share it. In the hush between them that follows her revelation, he clenches his jaw to hold back a river of grief and anger. She wonders if she has betrayed the very heart he once placed in her care. He wonders if he can ever look at her again without seeing the spark of doubt that flickered behind her eyes. Yet when she steps toward him, her hand trembling as it reaches for his, he feels the pull of their shared history. Every tender moment that has shaped them, every hope they stitched together while sleep dripped from their eyelids like dew. John Gage's private world, meanwhile, begins to intertwine with their own. In his plush office, he scrolls through search results until he finds that photograph. David and Diana standing before a tiny cottage that seems to promise a lifetime of sunshine. Something in their clasped hands sparks a memory of his own youth, a girl he once loved who fled from his wealth, returning his attentions as though they threatened to smother her spirit. He remembers the swell in his chest as David and Diana standing before a tiny cottage that seems to promise a lifetime of sunshine. Something in their clasped hands sparks a memory of his own youth, a girl he once loved who fled from his wealth, returning his attentions as though they threatened to smother her spirit. He remembers the swell in his chest as she vanished into the night, unmoored by his capacity to buy 1,000 things but unable to secure the one thing they both needed. In the quiet of his penthouse, he traces her memory with trembling fingertips, and as David and Diana drift through his elaborate proposition, he wonders if this is his chance to find redemption, or the final admission that love cannot be bought at any price. Yet John is not merely the scepter-wielding tycoon archetype. He is a man who laughs in boardrooms, yet weeps unseen in mirrored bathrooms, who entertains the world with his charm yet wonders if charm is hollow when stripped of shared humanity. In the lobby of his own life, he searches for a moment of genuine emotion, something that might burst through his meticulously curated existence. He reads the lines on Diana's face the night they meet, the way her eyes darken with unease, the subtle tremor in her voice. He glimpses echoes of the girl who slipped away from him, and he wonders if the broken pieces of love can ever be forged anew in the crucible of sacrifice. To Diana, he is at once the embodiment of temptation and a conundrum of compassion. She cannot decide if he is villain or savior, for in his polite gaze she sees both promise and peril. He offers her not just a sum of money, but a mirror in which she might glimpse herself. In the hush of their late-night conversation, he listens to her heartache as though his very breath depends on her words. His gaze is unflinching, and in that steadiness she discerns an unexpected gentleness, one that terrifies her even as it touches the poetry of her soul. For David, John becomes a spectre of loss and hope interwoven. He stands at a poker table where chips click and clatter, each one a heartbeat of fortune and downfall. He views John's wealth with equal parts envy and revulsion, even as he sits at the table, hands shaking as he places yet another bet. In David's mind, John is both the devil and a god, capable of obliterating 2 lives with a single check, yet also potentially the key to unlocking a future unbound from credit card statements and eviction notices. David's resentment simmers like molten iron beneath his shirt, forging every decision in the fire of wounded pride and desperate love. When Diana returns to David in the early light of dawn, drawn from John's world back into the intimate hum of their shared life, she finds him huddled by their kitchen table, eyes red-rimmed as though he has wept until his soul bled. In that moment, the world stands suspended between 2 horizons, one defined by possibility, the other by the weight of reality. As she steps toward him, he looks up, and her gaze sees not betrayal, but a desperate bravery that staggers his heart. He reaches for her, and in their embrace lies both agony and a tether to hope, that love, when tested by fire, can still smolder gently enough to ignite new dawns. John watches their reconciliation from a distance, his presence lurking like a shadow in their periphery. At first, he believes he has authored their fate with a single proposition. Yet in the hush of his mansion, he realizes that the most profound forces break free from the bonds of his designs. Even as he writes checks and crafts scenarios, the unpredictable alchemy of human hearts defies his every calculation. He sees David's forgiveness as a moment of triumph that transcends his own need to be needed. In the aftermath, Diana and David navigate their world together like sailors charting a familiar reef-laced sea. Their footsteps echo with cautious optimism, each step forward infused with the understanding that love is not a hedged bet, but a fragile flame. Diana's poems now carry echoes of their ordeal, verses that murmur of choice and consequence, scars and redemption. In coffee shops and open mics, she reads words that taste of both bitterness and grace, reminding listeners that hearts can warp under pressure yet emerge resilient as tempered steel. David, for his part, returns to the scaffolding of his ambitions with renewed fervor, determined to build not just houses, but a home that sings with laughter and possibility. The bills still pile up on their desk, but he approaches them with steadier hands, tempered by the knowledge that love can endure desperate gambits. He tucks Diana's poems in his jacket pocket as he heads to work each morning, carrying her words like a second skin, a reminder of the treasure he almost lost. John, watching them from afar, feels a shift in his own architecture of thought. He arrives at board meetings with sharper insights. He anticipates human desires not as mere data points, but as fragile galaxies of need and hope. He dedicates himself to philanthropic ventures that bear Diana's quiet influence. Funds for poets, scholarships for couples in crisis, grants for shelters, each initiative a testament to the power of love tested and renewed. In every contract he signs, he seeks not only profit but the possibility of meaning beyond balance sheets, and so, each character walks forward, their stories forever altered by a single night that toppled illusions and revealed hidden strengths. Diana, tempered by sacrifice, emerges as a woman who knows that love's deepest valleys often glisten with the brightest truths. Her poems become hymns to resilience, echoing the fragile beauty that flourishes when hearts remain open despite the world's harsh demands. David, forged by desperation and forgiveness, stands steadfast at her side, each sunrise a promise of unwavering partnership. John, ennobled by the humility of witnessing love's triumph, wields his wealth not as a scepter, but as a brush to paint possibility across the canvas of human struggle. In the chorus of their lives, they discover that heroes need not be flawless and that love's invincible grace often blooms in the soil of our darkest moments. Their paths entwine like a melody, each note resonant with the promise that, even when fortune demands the highest price, the human heart can still choose to believe in a world where devotion reigns beyond measure. A hush settled over the abandoned mansion's driveway before dawn, as if the place itself waited with bated breath for the crew's arrival. Nestled in the hills above the Mojave Desert, the house, its stucco walls bleached by the relentless California sun, had once served as an oasis for the wealthy. Now, its empty corridors echoed with memories and whispered legends. When the production designer first laid eyes on it, he knew it would be perfect for Diana's sumptuous Las Vegas suite. Yet the mansion's history came bundled with a crate of bizarre tales, rumors of late-night seances held in its aging ballroom, of phantom footsteps pacing the wood-paneled hallways, and of a faded portrait on the landing that was said to watch intruders with malevolent eyes. During location scouting, one grip swore he glimpsed the silhouette of a woman in a tattered white gown drifting past a shattered window, only to vanish when he blinked. The story spread through the crew like wildfire, fueling a nervous excitement that clung to everyone even after the lights were rigged and the cameras began to roll. Inside the mansion's cavernous interior, the art department labored to transform dusty carpets and cracked plaster into a setting of opulent indulgence. They brought in imported antique mirrors, gilded sconces, and silken tapestries embroidered with gold thread. But whenever they left the site at night, equipment mysteriously vanished. A prized Persian rug would slip away with no record of its pickup, only to reappear days later in a trunk behind the florist's shop. Lights flickered at odd intervals, plunging the set into sudden darkness, and some insisted that if you listened carefully, you could hear the squeak of an unseen piano, though a baby grand in storage never made it onto the set. The line between reality and rumor blurred so completely that one morning the director awakened in his trailer to find a single dusty rose laid out on his pillow, with no sign of who might have left it there. It was as if the mansion itself sought to play a part in the story it hosted, reminding everyone that the allure of desire is often entwined with the chill of the unknown. Across town, in a cramped corner of a Las Vegas casino's back corridor, a contingent of producers and studio executives gathered for a clandestine meeting. They had chosen a back office off the casino floor, its walls adorned with fraying posters of past wrestling matches, to discuss the project under strict secrecy. According to a producer who was present, the talk was punctuated by the rhythmic jingle of slot machines outside, as though fate herself presided over their dialogue. They debated casting, budgets, and whether the premise, this exchange of a night's intimacy for a fortune, might provoke moral outrage. One executive, an unabashed Philadelphian who had grown up on parables of hard work and integrity, worried that audiences would revolt. Another, a seasoned veteran with a penchant for controversy, grinned and said, "Scandals sell tickets." Over the din of the casino's roars and cheers, an undercurrent of tension wove through the meeting. Could a film so explicitly transactional be embraced by mainstream viewers? They resolved to press on, keenly aware that if they pulled off this gamble, they might redefine romance drama in the process. Casting brought its own whirlwind of unexpected revelations. When Robert Redford's manager was first approached, Redford himself supposedly laughed at the notion. "Me, trading a woman for $1 million? That's the kind of story they'll remind me of at dinner parties for the rest of my life," he is said to have quipped. Rumor has it he passed, citing both moral discomfort and scheduling conflicts. The role of John Gage ultimately went to Woody Harrelson, who auditioned while drinking coffee in his sweatpants, paying little heed to the script's subtle demands. Laurie Singer, who had made her name in a certain Stephen King adaptation, came within a whisker of being cast as Diana, but conflicting obligations sent her back to New York. Ultimately, the role of Diana Murphy landed on Demi Moore, fresh from a string of high-profile roles and on the cusp of superstardom. She reportedly spent long evenings with Adrian Lyne, the director, debating Diana's motivations and moral compass, an exercise that not only cemented their creative bond but also sparked rumors of a clandestine romance, though both insisted they were merely deeply invested in character development. Bruce Willis, approached for the role of David Murphy, was in the throes of shooting back-to-back action films and politely declined, suggesting his close friend Robert Downey Jr., who was then unavailable due to his stage commitments. So ultimately, the producers circled back to Woody Harrelson's roommate, a rising actor who had given an electrifying performance in a small indie drama. That man was named Robert Downey Jr., who had seen his career hustle through highs and lows, unstable at times, brilliant at others. Though he seemed an unlikely fit for the square-jawed, morally conflicted David, his raw vulnerability convinced the producers otherwise. Few could predict that his portrayal might tower above the more established names, a lesson in the unpredictable alchemy of star power. Filming in the desert heat introduced challenges that bordered on the surreal. The crew erected a temporary Vegas casino facade in a remote stretch of the Mojave, far beyond any cell reception. To save on costs, production used real casino equipment, rows of slot machines, card tables, and neon signage. Locals dubbed it the Desert Casino that time forgot, an oasis for gamblers who happened upon it by accident. But the desert's extremes made life precarious. Temperatures soared past 110 degrees, turning asphalt into molten glass. One location scout, entrusted with finding a vantage point, awoke one morning to discover his sleeping bag had actually melted onto the sun-baked hood of his truck. At night, winds whipped the sand into miniature twisters that invaded every nook of the makeshift backlit, coating cameras and circuit boards in abrasive dust. Cinematographers painted tinted filters on their lenses to capture that quintessential Vegas glow, but the glass often cracked under the relentless heat. Equipment rigs toppled like dominoes under sudden gusts of wind, and one Foley artist, tasked with recording the gentle chime of glasses, found that the jar of marbles he brought blew across the desert floor in a way that sounded more like a sandstorm than a clink of crystal. The decision to film actual casino sequences alongside card counters and real money poker games birthed some of the most vivid stories from production, stories that border on myth. One afternoon, the director entered a dimly lit baccarat room disguised as a visiting player, clad in a dusty cowboy hat and sunglasses. Unbeknownst to the professional gamblers, he lingered at the back, critiquing angles and watching their hands move like dancers on a neon stage. In that seething cauldron of tension, an elderly matron at the baccarat table declared, "Honey, you don't need that fancy camera. Just put it on me, and let me win a fortune." She raked in chips so fast the pit boss called her the slot machine's nemesis, vowing she was destined to clean house. Meanwhile, the actors, drenched in fancy gowns and tailored suits, slipped into the casino's shadows alongside seasoned pros. One scene called for Diana to lose a hand, and the chips for that table were real money. The actress, casting doubt on her own poker skills, asked to rehearse first. But when she practiced, she inadvertently won 3 hands in a row from a professional gambler who later confided, "I thought she was a ringer," only to hear she'd never played a hand in her life. Word spread that Demi Moore possessed some kind of blackjack mojo, though she insisted it was beginner's luck bolstered by pure adrenaline. In final takes, every billion-dollar chip was swapped with realistic foam copies to avoid financial ruin, but the spontaneous reactions remained. Players leapt from their chairs in disbelief, guards approached expecting the cops to follow, and on at least one night the security team shut down the shooting to sort out a mistaken all-in bet. Meanwhile, on the day they were to film the climactic hotel confrontation, everything that could go wrong did so spectacularly. The shoot took place on the infamous 50th floor of the Sands Hotel, where the elevators had developed a notorious reputation for malfunctioning. One final layer of strangeness emerges when considering the film's enduring cultural footprint. Critics who view it years later, often through streaming platforms, note that certain scenes contain fleeting glimpses of real animals, pigeons perched on rooftop ledges, or stray raccoons rummaging behind garbage bins during late-night exterior shoots. The presence of these creatures, neither scripted nor summoned, says something about the unpredictable life that inhabits every frame. During the climactic swimming pool scene, shot at a villa in Malibu, cast and crew reported the water turning an ethereal green just as the cameras rolled. A blue-green alga bloom had developed overnight, rendering the pool a shade of luminous jade. Production paused for 2 days while environmental specialists tested the water, but by then the algae had receded as swiftly as it arrived. When the pool glimmered again under bright lights, it was crystal clear, an aquatic parable for the film's themes of temptation and clarity. In the final cut, the pool appears unnaturally still, as though hiding any clue to its strange metamorphosis. By the time audiences first glimpsed the finished film, the carnival of oddities that marked its birth had receded into collective memory. But those who had labored to bring its story to life carried these experiences like tattoos etched beneath the skin, reminders that creation often courts the uncanny. Rumors persist that the mansion in the hills remains haunted by a ghostly woman's laughter late at night, that the smiling portrait on its landing still watches visitors with knowing eyes. Some swear the laughing child can still be heard echoing through the hotel set's elevator shaft on deserted nights, while indie pianists in Los Angeles occasionally swear they hear a faint clink of misaligned keys concertizing beneath their fingertips. And somewhere, buried in a dusty drawer, lies the powder blue silk dress, now a fragile relic of unsolved rips. If you pass by the winding road leading to that desert casino facade, you might glimpse its neon lights flickering in the distance, conjuring the phantom call of chance that seduced a young couple into a wager no love could fully win. In the end, these strangest facts remind us that movies, much like life, are woven from a tapestry of intention and accident, of purposeful artistry and enigmatic mystery. The camera can capture every scripted line, but it cannot harness the way a haunted mansion will rattle its windows, or how a plumber's wrench lodged in a pipe can unleash an impromptu geyser. It cannot predict the inscrutable impulse that drives someone to smear black paint across a marble figure, forging a real-world echo of a fictional moral dilemma. And it cannot anticipate the alchemy that, when anguish meets invention, transforms fleeting moments, an actor's glance, a child's laugh, a ripple across a pool, into the enduring brushstrokes of cinematic legend. But for those who dare to peer behind the velvet curtains, to linger in the hush between takes, these stories twine together into a secret ledger, one that catalogues the most peculiar, the most wonderful, and the most inexplicable moments that turn a film from mere celluloid into folklore. In the moment the title card dissolves into the first flash of neon and the camera pans across that sumptuous Las Vegas skyline, something unsettles the air, a feeling that rasps beneath the veneer of glitz and glamour, as though the city itself harbors a secret too uncomfortable to speak aloud. The film begins by showing everything the world has to offer: bright lights, champagne flutes, and the tantalizing promise of a life unburdened by ordinary cares. Yet within moments, the audience senses that beneath the glimmer lies the cold calculus of human desire, how far a person might be willing to venture when love and money collide. If you lean back in your seat and listen, you will hear the faint hum of conflicting judgments. Is it a cautionary tale of moral compromise, a soap opera spectacle of emotional extremes, or perhaps a bold filmic exploration of what happens when loyalty meets temptation? The camera's slow drip across a hotel corridor that gleams two bright hints that this is more than a simple romance. It is a quiet howl of moral conflict echoing beneath the city's manicured veneer. The first significant event unfolds not in words but in that charged encounter at the casino. David and Diana, two young lovers whose devotion has been honed by hardship, arrive in a haze of sweat and desperation. Their hands, clasped as though each finger clusters for mutual survival, tremble as they step into a neon-lit cavern of chance. The viewer, privy to every pattern of doubt etched into their faces, watches the stakes mount as David's luck ebbs away. In this early sequence, the film asks a question with no clear answer. How much risk can love bear before it cracks? Critics often point to this scene as a microcosm of the entire narrative, for it sets the film's emotional barometer spinning. David's losses at the blackjack table become more than monetary. They echo the deeper anxiety that they may lose the one thing they hold most dear. The camera lingers on Diana's gaze, shifting from hopeful to fearful as the amount he wagers grows. Her breath catches in her throat, visible in that moment of agony when he doubles down on insufficient cards. It is as though their shared dream is measured in chips at a table, and every red felt place is a rung on the ladder between salvation and ruin. The audience, already invested in their love, feels a surge of uneasy empathy, because in that moment we all recognize how a single lost hand can fracture lives, leaving the heart exposed to the world's sharp edges. As that scene fades, the film cuts to an interview magazine cover plastered across the lobby, announcing that John Gage, the billionaire provocateur, will appear at a charity gala in Los Angeles. There is a quiet irony in this jump from desperate gamblers to a man for whom money is but a toy. John Gage is introduced offhandedly through voiceover as a man who bought what he wanted and asked why afterward. To some critics, Gage's arrival feels like a jolt of cold water, as though the narrative hush is shattered by a man so unrestrained by ethics that his presence accuses every viewer of some moral deficiency. In critical circles, Gage has been dubbed the devil in Armani, and indeed, his first camera close-up carries the weight of a challenge. His eyes teasing the audience, as if to say, "Would you do what I propose if I wrote the check?" In lensing this introduction, Adrian Lyne chooses to film Gage framed between glinting glass and steel, crafting an image of ambition incarnate. There's no slow reveal here. Gage strides into view with the confidence of a man who believes himself untouchable. For many reviewers, this shot became a lightning rod. Is Gage meant to be admired, loathed, or pitied? The film does not spell it out. Instead, his visage marks the turning point when luxury steps into desperation's orbit, orbiting both in perfect symmetry and with impending collision. When Diana, driven by frustration, is invited to speak with Gage at an art auction, the critical lens shifts again, this time focusing on a woman caught between pride and necessity. In that sequence, she enters a gallery bathed in candlelight, where patrons in chiffon and tuxedos swirl like graceful wraiths. The shoot took place on the infamous 50th floor of the Sands Hotel, where the elevators had developed a notorious reputation for malfunctioning. The script called for daylight pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the tension between David and John as the stakes peaked. The production team arranged for the hotel to clear a large section of the floor, cordoning off certain rooms to replicate David and Diana's suite. However, a miscommunication led to a plumber's crew remaining hidden in the service corridor, fixing a leaky faucet. When the director shouted, "Action!" the plumber placed his hand on a now-exposed pipe, triggering a geyser that shot water across the hallway like an erupting geyser in Yellowstone. The spray cascaded through the suite's doors, soaking the actors, drenching the plush carpet, and short-circuiting the key lights. Cameras halted mid-roll, while the cast scrambled for dry towels. The plumber, soaked to the bone, emerged sheepishly, tools in hand, apologizing as though he were Ohio's most famous arsonist instead of a humble maintenance man. Once the waters receded, the crew discovered the leak had been caused by a monkey wrench left in the pipe, an oversight so baffling that the assistant director nicknamed it the Houdini wrench incident. Though the day's shooting was delayed by 4 hours, the take that eventually made the cut captured a flurry of emotion that felt raw because of the actor's real discomfort. In the final edit, when David slaps John over the envelope's contents, the tension spikes so palpably that audiences assumed a sweetener of method acting. Not all oddities took place in the desert or atop high-rise hotel floors. Some occurred in the seclusion of the studio's soundstage, where voices drifted like ghosts through wall-to-wall insulation. The Foley artists, responsible for crafting every click of a glass, shuffle of cards, and scrape of a chair, found themselves fated by both surprises and scares. One night, the head of the Foley department stayed late to record the ominous hum of an elevator in Diana's hotel suite, an effect designed to underscore her isolation and dread. The recording booth, originally isolated in a back corner, suddenly filled with soft giggles, as though a child had snuck in to play. Each time the artist hit the play button, The ghostly giggling crept louder into the speakers. He dismissed it at first as a neighbor kid, but the building had long been vacant. On subsequent nights, the laughter grew more insistent, sometimes sounding like echoes of party chatter laced with a child's trill. Crew members tried to follow the sound, creeping through darkened halls and peering into empty restrooms, but never found its source. Under the layer of paranoia it stoked, the Foley artist dubbed the phantom the laughing child. To capture their audio essence, they recorded without amplification, letting the faint whispers through. When mixed in the final sound mix, the elevator hum took on a subtly warped, unsettling timbre. Listeners swear they hear the hint of a giggle carried on the wind, like a memory of innocence in a film that pregnant with temptation and regret. Another story, equally strange, arose from the wardrobe department's efforts to clothe the lead characters in attire befitting their plight. Diana's wardrobe included a series of dresses hand-selected from vintage boutiques in Los Angeles, each one echoing sunlit high hopes and a tinge of quiet desperation. One such gown, a powder blue silk number with lace trim, had reportedly been worn by Grace Kelly to an early screening of Rear Window. The rental shop's owner laughed when he realized a small tear had appeared, just a sliver, along the hem after Demi Moore had tried it on. He chalked it up to age. But when the costume supervisor patched it, a new rip would appear the next day in a different spot, despite the gown being hung carefully in a protected closet. For weeks, no one could find a logical cause. They moved it between racks, into sealed garment bags, but each morning a fresh tear blossomed. Finally, after the wrap party, the dress was donated to a charity, and the patchwork tears ceased. The pattern of rips was odd, almost as though the fabric itself was alive, twisting beneath unseen hands. In the final cut, the dress appears exactly as it did on the first day, a ghost of all its past transgressions never visible to the audience's eye. The composer, Robert Abrams, new to scoring feature films, found that his studio's grand piano refused to stay in tune. He had flown to L.A. with his own Steinway, but when he set it up beside the scoring board, the technician discovered that the floor beneath it sagged ever so slightly, warping each key. When Abrams played chords to test the sound, each note split into two pitches, like a songbird's fractured cry. Determined to capture the perfect melody for Diana's theme, he resorted to borrowing a piano from a local jazz club. But that instrument had its own quirks. A single middle C would spontaneously drop a quarter tone when played quickly in succession, as though marking Morse code to the heavens. Abrams wove these accidental off-notes into the score, believing they added a shade of dissonance that mirrored Diana's conflicted heart. In editing, when she gazes down at the envelope that carries her sacrifice, the piano's keys whisper a fractured melody, a testament to all the unintended cracks beneath the facade of elegance. Perhaps the strangest anecdote of all involves the film's release, rumors of which one could envision unfolding in a smoky backroom of a Hollywood dive rather than an executive office. In New York City one brisk autumn evening, a promotional event was held at a high-end art gallery. Invitations promised an exclusive screening, accompanied by a tour of an exhibit featuring erotic photography and sculptures exploring themes of desire and morality. Guests, art critics, studio bigwigs, and a handful of actors who had auditioned, mingled beneath gleaming chandeliers as waiters passed trays of champagne and caviar. Seated in plush theater chairs beside white marble statues, they watched the first 10 minutes unfold. Then, mid-scene, a lone woman's scream emerged not from the screen but from the gallery's rear alcove. Guests stampeded through exhibits of nude sculptures to find a life-size marble statue of a woman, reminiscent of Diana, lanced by a metal rod, clearly not part of the exhibit. The women's sculpture had been defaced with black paint, a crude attempt to shroud its unclad form in darkness. By the time security arrived, the vandal was nowhere to be seen, but the damaged art echoed with irony, an unconscious protest against a film that traded love for money. In the aftermath, the studio marveled at the twisted synchronicity. Was it a performance art statement? A disgruntled feminist's manifesto? A random act of vandalism that coincidentally mirrored the film's contested themes? To this day, no one knows, but the image of that defaced statue remains etched in the memories of those who attended. The first 10 minutes of the screening resumed, but the mood had shifted. The audience watched through the lens of suspicion, as though every flash of skin on screen carried the weight of the vandal's black paint. News outlets ran breathless headlines, "Art Attack at Movie Premiere" and "Sculpture Speaks. Love Can't Be Bought." The buzz reverberated for weeks, more potent than any trailer or billboard. When Diana, driven by frustration, is invited to speak with Gage at an art auction, the critical lens shifts again, this time focusing on a woman caught between pride and necessity. In that sequence, she enters a gallery bathed in candlelight, where patrons in chiffon and tuxedos swirl like graceful wraiths. The floor, polished to a black mirror sheen, reflects chandeliers that hang like frozen stars. Diana navigates this opulent world with a mixture of awe and dread, each step echoing louder than the last. As Gage approaches and extends a formal invitation for a private discussion, the viewer feels a tingle of both foreboding and fascination. Critics have long noted that this scene transforms Diana from a passive victim of circumstance into an active agent, albeit one whose agency feels compromised by survival instincts. She returns Gage's studied smile with measured grace, and in their conversation, one senses the fulcrum of her conflict. Pride demands refusal, desperation murmurs acquiescence. Every word she speaks carries the weight of her private financial horrors. Every pause underscores the love she feels for David. Some critics praise her portrayal as a nuanced display of complexity, a woman whose heart trembles between duty and want. Others see the moment as an uncomfortable display of prostitution of sentiment, still controversial to many viewers who debated if her choice was authentic or contrived by cinematic forces. This tension, critics agree, is the fulcrum upon which the narrative pivots. Diana's confrontation with Gage becomes a prism through which love, money, and moral agency refract into 1,000 conflicting hues, ensuring that the film's impact resonates in every heart that watches. The next pivotal event arrives with the infamous proposition, the moment Gage leans forward in a haze of tailor-made suits and declares his offer: $1 million for a single night with Diana. The setting is no plush office, but the hushed sanctum of Gage's private dining room, all red velvet and mahogany, a place that speaks of privilege without apology. The camera tracks Diana's trembling hand as she sets down her glass of champagne, every ripple on the surface magnified in slow motion, as though the liquid itself foreshadows the crash of innocence. In signal close-up, David's face tightens as if his blood has turned to ice. The proposition hangs in the air like a guillotine blade, so simple, so monstrously precise, so shattering in its clarity. Critics have written entire essays on that moment, debating the film's moral universe. Is Gage a villain, a philanthropic provocateur, or a twisted echo of humanity's darkest impulses? Is his offer an allegory for the commodification of intimacy, or a parable that whispers, "What would you sacrifice for the life you crave?" Every shot in this scene, each cut to Gage's faint smirk, each drain of David's jaw, builds a sense of inescapable gravity. The sound design shuts out all distraction, no background music interrupts, only the fine click of crystal and the hush of drawn breaths remain. In the hushed vacuum, viewers hear the thudding of their own anxieties, imagining what they would do if their own love were laid on an altar of gold. When Diana whispers that she must discuss it with David, the camera cuts to the hush of the staircase, isolating her from Gage's expectant gaze, and then drifts to David, waylaid by the brewing storm of his own doubts as he waits outside. For critics, this moment crystallizes the film's thematic core. Love's purest moments are most tested in the glare of possibility. Some essays argue that this scene is a cinematic masterstroke because it turns the power dynamic on its head. Here is a billionaire deciding the worth of intimacy, yet also stripped naked by his own loneliness. Gage is captive to his curiosity, wrapped in a suit that cannot hide a man desperate to feel he still belongs to a world where emotions cannot be weighed on a scale or counted in zeros. In unraveling the threads of this scene, reviewers have noted how the simple symmetry of camera angles, Gage framed at eye level against plush backdrops, David shot from slightly below, encodes an unspoken hierarchy of power. Yet this hierarchy is not static, for when Diana ascends the staircase to face her fate, the balance shifts. She becomes an arbiter of her own destiny, as though the camera waits for her to decide the world's moral code by her trembling nod or her steady refusal. The aftermath of that proposition is a study in human dust, the broken fragments of pride, love, and despair. Diana returns to David's modest apartment, and in that cramped space the film achieves its most scalding directness. In the flicker of lamplight, there is no grandeur, only two humans throttled by their own choices. When she reveals the offer, David's face contorts. He stands, unable to measure her tears, palms pressed to the living room wall as though bracing against a gale. The camera captures every tremor of his jaw, every quiver of her lower lip. This is not melodrama but a crucible of raw emotion, where words are dispensable and every glance conveys 1,000 regrets. Critics have long lauded these scenes for elevating the film beyond trite romance drama, seeing in them the seed of a cinematic conversation about the limits of love. What happens when love is weighed in dollars, when intimacy becomes a transaction? Some argue that Diana's tears are not mere performance but a vessel for communal shame, for the audience's own whispered judgments about what they would, or would not, do under such crushing pressure. The argument that ripples through this half of the film emerges most starkly in the extended sequence where Diana slips away for that single night. Critics concede that watching her enter Gage's penthouse suite, stepping beyond a threshold of emotional collapse, provokes conflicting impulses: empathy for her sacrifice, disgust at her submission, admiration for her courage, and fear at the knowledge that love can fracture under the burn of necessity. The cinematography here is cold in its elegance. White sheets, marble floors, and a towering view of the desert beyond, all lit by a pale wash of neon filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. Diana walks with measured grace, yet her posture betrays the internal calculus of desperation. Gage waits in a robe, the soft silk brushing his ankles like an invitation to sin, but his eyes, a mixture of longing and sorrow, betray his own melancholy. When the door closes and she allows him to approach, the audience feels the delicate snap of fate's threads. In critical terms, this sequence is often cited as a masterclass in restraint. The film shows almost nothing, yet conveys everything. Subtle gestures, her hand trembling as she lifts a glass, his expression softening as he removes his own robe, become the lexicon of sacrifice. In post-analysis, many critics emphasize that a director who elides erotic spectacle for emotional gravity wields a sharper tool than one who simply resorts to shock value. The result is that what happens off-screen feels more devastating than any explicit depiction could have achieved.